Our guest today says in his book, when I was in middle school, I was introduced to Dungeons and Dragons. And that's a line from his book. And I resonate with this because when I was in sixth grade, I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. And I would also say this, one of the reasons that he knows, is that I've been deeply affected by gaming. It's impacted a lot of the things that I have built. And when you think about gaming, one of the things that's fascinating about that world is that if you talk to a game developer, they will describe things, they'll use terms like universe and meta. And this idea that when you create a game, even if it's a board game like Dungeons and Dragons that has rules and lots of different kinds of manuals, that those things that tell you how it functions, like how you actually play the game, affect what my sons would describe as the meta in that universe. In other words, they're setting the foundation for the expectations, the assumptions of the way things will work. And what's also fascinating is if you change one piece of that rule book, whether it's in a video game, where you actually what they describe as nerf a weapon, where you take a weapon that's really powerful and you change its power, you affect everything downstream. It has this trickle effect. But if you're just looking at it, you just look at a board game of Dungeons and Dragons or a video game, or if you look at it, you on the face of it, you go like, oh, it's a video game. Or this is just a board game. But until you get into the actual rules and you start to see the meta, the storyline that's been constructed by someone who has set the foundation, it gets really interesting at that point. And I think it's fascinating to think about that, of course, related to something like trust, is that we know that there's a lot of things occurring within and between us and around us in our organizations that are a part of the meta, the storyline that we tell ourselves. And some of those storylines, the meta that we create inside this about the way things work, may not actually be fully true because we aren't hearing the whole truth. So in high trust organizations, we see that there is a lot more sharing between people understanding themselves better and actually having an organizational structure that supports an unveiling, if you will, of what that universe is what's actually going on. So it's just that it got me thinking for our guests today. I'm super excited for this conversation, Sabbath.
Let's get this wild conversation going. Welcome to the Wild Conversation, where human being and human doing converge, reshaping the world of leadership, culture, and performance. Today, we get to have a wild conversation with Christopher Stitt. Chris is a seasoned security executive with more than 2 decades of experience leading high-stakes operations across the public and private sectors. He served as the director of global security for major corporations, led executive protection teams, and advised organizations on risk, resilience, and crisis response at the highest levels. Known for his clarity under pressure and his human-centered approach, he brings an uncommon steadiness and strategic insight to some of today's most complex security challenges. He's also the author of the new book, Scaling Pyramids: Leadership Lessons from a Mid-Level Bureaucrat, where he reframes modern security through trust, preparedness, and people-first leadership, offering a practical and transformative vision for how teams and communities can truly stay safe. And he's a Wild certified trust coach and a dear friend of our team at Wild Leaders. So we're honored to welcome Christopher Stitt to the Wild Conversation. Chris, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you guys to talk a little bit about my journey and my story, and hopefully connect with people out there so that they can understand leadership from this perspective and to learn how to scale the pyramids of their own bureaucracies.
It's going to be a rich conversation. Before we jump
Indeed.
into it, we're going to play a round of wild cards. Chris, very familiar with it. I know you could pull 10 from your own deck, but I saved the work. So I pulled 10 from our deck of 52. I have not looked at what these are going to ask us. So we'll each pick a number between 1 and 10. I'll go first and answer. Chris, you can go next. Pick a number, and then Rob will round us out. I'm going to pick 2. Are you failing to delegate because you micromanage or because you think you can get it done faster yourself?
Wow,
Yes.
So no, it's a great question, and I think it also depends somewhat on the season of my life, but also depends on the where I am in the team and organization. When you start with a new team in particular and you need to build the trust with them, uh, you really have a tendency to, I think, micromanage more just because you can, you're not sure of their skills. You don't have that trust built in yet. But then as you know, build that trust and you have a better understanding of that person and your relationship with them, then you have a tendency to delegate more and allow more freedom with that. But then it kind of all starts over again when somebody new gets added to that team, and it's just like, you know what, I can get this done faster than that person. Let me just do it and get it done, which you then need to again rebuild that trust with that new team member so that you can effectively delegate to them. And even when you think you can get it done faster, that may be true, but your most valuable commodity as a leader is your time. And even if somebody starts out doing it 80% as quickly as you, if you can recapture that time and allow them to grow in that skill, it is something that is really going to benefit you and them in the long run.
That's so good. I'm gonna answer this question too. So maybe we can all answer the same one, or Rob, you can pick a different number.
I'm sorry, I
But
answered your question, didn't I?
no, it's all good
It was
because
good though. It was
it's an
good.
excellent answer. I'm gonna piggyback off it in the realm of parenting because I will absolutely do something because I can just do it faster. Ever, I will set myself up for a situation in which I am not making the best use of my time or allowing my daughter to learn this skill that is going to help the family and help her future in the long run. I did that last night because then I find myself frustrated because I'm doing it. And the reality is, I have created this situation for myself. I absolutely failed to delegate yesterday and the day before and the day before, and now I'm mad about it. So it's a good check for my spirit today.
And I
Okay,
totally
Rob.
failed to delegate answering that question to you. So
No.
Well, I get to
sincerely,
answer the same
Well,
question now.
yep. Okay.
So, in the spirit of transparency, and I think Sabbath, you know this about me, is that I don't know if I think I can do it better myself, but sometimes I'm compulsive about doing it myself. So one example that I used to struggle with, if any of my former doctoral students are listening, they will laugh, is that I'm not the kind of person who could look at a blank piece of land, like if you were going to put a house on it, and I could just dream the house up from scratch. I'm the kind of person who deconstructs from a model. So if you give me a framework, then I'll deconstruct it. So I would tell my students, you got to understand that the editing process, when you turn something into me, if we're working on a project together or a publication, I will edit it a lot. But a lot of times I think they felt like if they finish something, it's done. But I'm a deconstructor, so I need to see an idea for a product or a paper or whatever, and then I begin the deconstruction process. Not because I think I can do it better, but I'm compulsive about just doing it. And so but I have to have that original model. So when you asked that question, Sab, I was thinking it was a delegation issue, but it was also about a construction issue together. Does that make sense? Like delegation for me crosses over into creation or innovation. That's more than most people wanted to know.
Good. That's a
Oh,
good
it's so
wild
good.
card.
It's so good, Sabbath. Thank you. Chris, what a pleasure to have this conversation. And I want to start off because I know this is a question I hate when people ask me, but at the same, because I hate talking about sometimes my career journey, but at the same time, I think a little context matters. And so can you briefly just give our listeners an introduction to kind of your journey as a leader? Like, what is the context behind which? And I got a lot of other questions, so I don't want you to feel like you have to spend too much time, but just give us a snapshot of your journey as a leader.
yeah, no, I appreciate it. So it's funny. I know a lot of times on your podcast, you'll ask, when did you first recognize that you were a leader?
Yeah.
And I was listening to one of the episodes recently, and you asked that question. And
Uh,
for me, it goes back to my youth
uh,
and my involvement in scouts, right? And it's something that I've always been drawn towards, trying to lead others, trying to set an example, things like that. I've also been very drawn to service and protection. And the old trope of the Los Angeles Police Department is to protect and serve,
Yeah.
things like that. So I've always been drawn to law enforcement. And as I graduated college, I went and served with the United States Capitol Police for about a year and a half. And then I started with the U.S. Department of State's Diplomatic Security Service. It's an interesting organization because you are a diplomat, you are a security professional, your office is the entire world. I served in 5 different countries for a total of 11 years
Mhm.
in senior roles, doing converged security, not just one small slice like a lot of people focus on, but really the whole range of physical security, personnel security, insider threat, executive protection, some cybersecurity, security technology, but then also we have the public-private partnership called OSAC, where we work with the private sector companies that are from the U.S. that have operations abroad. So
Mhm.
that was very eye-opening as well to see how the differences between corporate security and government security, things like that. Part of the job, as you're coming up through the ranks, is to develop yourself as a leader, but then
Mhm.
also making sure that you're developing others around you. One of the things I talk about in my book is the fact that we're kind of like easily replaceable cogs. And there's kind of like a running joke. You show up at a new assignment and people are like, "Hi, who are you?" And you're like, "Oh, I'm Chris. I'm the new Mary. I'm the person, I'm just kind of fitting into the position that pre-existed." But then you always put your own take on it.
Mhm.
Over time, as you get into it, you find where the role needs to be adjusted, and you need to do that. So
Yeah.
since I retired in 2023, I went ahead and started my own company, Crisis Lead LLC. And there, what I'm focused on is basically supporting companies build, reinvigorate, reformat their security programs.
Uh,
Um, some companies don't even realize that they need a security program, but they get to a certain size where duty of care actually becomes an issue,
mhm.
and they need help. So that's one of the things that I'm out there for. I'm getting a lot of clients right now reaching out to me for help with their security governance and policy to help them really frame it and align it with some of the international and national standards and best practices. So doing a
Okay.
lot of work in that space right now too.
Okay. One of the things, Chris, that I've been told, that we have so many friends across the security industry, and I've been told by some of our mutual friends, and I think you may have said this to me as well. What I was told by a few of you is that, oh, Rob, it's because you're a sheepdog. And so I'm curious for our listeners, would you like describe when you hear that in the security industry that there are sheep and sheepdogs, and it's not a slam on either, but it's
Mhm.
kind of a reality. Would you explain what that means? The sheepdog different distinction that I see it in the books written by our friends. What do security professionals mean when they say that?
So what they really mean is that a lot of people kind of go through their lives oblivious to the dangers and threats that they face. They're focused on what they're doing day to day, walking along the beautiful green open pasture, grazing along, just kind of oblivious to what's going on around them. What they don't realize is there's not just sheep and sheepdogs, there's wolves. And there is evil in this world.
Yeah,
There are people that are out to get you, right? Whether you're a target of opportunity or you're a target because of something, some status that you have or something else like that.
yeah,
So then there's that third category of people, the sheepdogs. We have a tendency to have a lot of wolf-like attributes, i.e., we're examining, we've got a curiosity, we've are watching things over and watching for potential targets of opportunity, things like that. But we are doing it in order to protect the sheep so
yeah.
that you can blithely go along and enjoy your pasture and graze. And whether you realize it or not, you've got somebody out there who's watching out for you.
That's good. And I know that your work goes beyond the security industry, but I also think there are huge lessons for all of us in terms of leadership in that space. You mentioned something a minute ago when you said part of our job is to develop ourselves. And I've always had a resonance or like a relatedness and just a like-minded spirit with people who have done research or leader development practice within military contexts, law enforcement. And part of it, I've always told myself, is part of it because I relate, the stakes are so high that the conversation gets very real very fast. And
Yeah.
in other contexts, it doesn't necessarily do that. And so in the work that we do, whether it's a corporate executive or someone running a small to mid cap business, is that are massive lessons to be learned that are synergies between what Wild Leaders does and why I think we resonate with the security industry.
I think part of it is the focus on trust.
Building trust in your business starts with being able to measure it so that you can create a pathway for change. Our Wild Trust Index measures the drivers of trust at the personal, team, and organizational levels. We are building the largest database on the drivers of trust inside of organizations. This survey will inform growth imperatives and the necessary organizational change needed to fuel that growth. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today.
Because you've got, as a security professional, you
Yeah.
have to have the trust and confidence of those that you're protecting. Otherwise, they're not going to follow your advice. They're not going to, do what you need them to do. They're not going to, as a friend of mine would like to say, willfully comply
Yeah.
with the rules, regulations, policies, procedures that you need them to follow in order to protect themselves and protect the company or the organization. So trust has a major,
Interesting.
underpinning for that. Also, I think, there's a lot about growth mindset, especially in security leaders, and the best security leaders that are out there. They understand the service mentality, again, protect and serve, and they understand growth mindset, that they need to be constantly improving, looking for ways to connect, looking for ways to build relationships and bridges, and things like that. And I think that, a lot of that comes through Wild Leaders, the Wild Toolkit,
Yeah.
the Wild Conversations.
That's so interesting. Thank you for that. Really good. And you said something else. You said this, and you said part of your job as a leader in the security industry, and I think people who lead in other contexts will relate. So this is why I'm curious about your response, is to develop yourself. And what it caused me to think when you said that, I had to write it down because I was like, is that part of the job? Or would you say that it must be? Like, we need to make sure that occurs, because I think what people don't think about let's just use security as this muse for this conversation right now, right? For all kinds of people, is that these are people they're human beings. They are not a system. And until they are a bunch of robots, we're talking about human beings, flesh and blood, with their own flaws, their own things that they sometimes hide, their own things that they're working out developmentally. And would you say that idea that part of the job is to develop yourself, is that too often it's not happening? And it's like, these are people that need that investment in them. I'm just curious about your thoughts about that. And we're getting to your book, I know, because we're starting to trip.
Yeah, no.
Yeah,
So I would say it is something that is not unique to security. It's not necessarily unique to leadership.
Yeah.
But it is a core facet of leadership, whether you're in security or outside. That, this focus that, again, I'll come back to growth mindset, this desire and drive to continually improve, this desire and drive to continually find new ways to do things better, to streamline things, to provide better service. You can't really, I've always thought of myself as, when you look at leadership archetypes, things like that, the visionary leader, somebody who is going to be able to cast a vision that people are going to buy into, that will follow you on that journey. But if you're not constantly learning and you're not constantly improving yourself, then you're going to get bypassed. Your visions will become stale. Your ability to interact with people will become stale. And I think it's really important to keep this continuous learning, growth mindset facets of your personality engaged, to keep becoming a better leader.
Whole Leaders, Wild Trust by Dr. Rob McKenna is now available through major booksellers nationwide. Debuting as a USA Today top 10 national bestseller and number 11 on the Publishers Weekly list. This book, in a cultural moment defined by fractured relationships, disengaged teams, and declining institutional trust, marked a rare achievement for leadership books centered on inner work and trust building. Why does this book matter now? Organizations across sectors are navigating burnout, low engagement, and risking skepticism toward leadership. Dr. McKenna's work offers a research-backed roadmap for leaders seeking to rebuild trust from the inside out. Get your book available now through any major bookseller nationwide.
So let's go there now, because I know you're getting into it. Tell us a little bit about your book, which I'm holding right here.
Awesome.
Scaling Pyramids. I think it's funny when I've seen people posting about it, they really do tee off on the leadership lessons from a mid-level bureaucrat, which I love that subtitle.
Yep.
So just as we set the frame for the rest of our conversation is, why did you write this book, Chris? Why did you write this book? And what is the central message that you would say, here's the thesis?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I actually wrote the book several years ago, and it was in response to, let's say, a couple of really bad managers. And it was kind of one of those moments where it's like, I know so much more about leadership than these guys that I could write a book. So I did. But then, I let it sit for about 10 years. And part of that was fear. Part of that was lack of trust in myself and my organization.
Mm-hmm.
We can get, deeper into that if we need to, down the line. But
yeah,
the other advantage to letting it sit, though, is like, you always are told, don't send the angry email. Let it sit overnight. I let it sit for 10 years. But in doing so, one of the things it allowed me to do was find more positive examples of leadership, right?
Okay.
To better balance it out. And then, a friend of mine, actually, Dr. Gav Schneider, he actually had mentioned to me, hey, Chris, if you can tie this into contemporary voices and contemporary research in leadership, you'll have a much better connection with your audience. And, again, this is part of the growth, right? Because originally I was like, no, this book has to be completely in my voice. It has to be completely my words. I don't want to feel like I'm stealing from anybody or anybody else's ideas, things like that. But when he explained that to me, it was actually kind of an opening for me. And I was able to then go ahead and do that in each chapter and connect it to some of the research and theory. And I think the main themes that I try to get across in there, two things. Leadership does not start at the top. It starts with you. Second one, leadership doesn't require a title. It requires a willingness. So if I can get those two things through to people and then back that up with strategies of when they're confronted with different situations, here's some things that will be useful for you to know to help you navigate those situations. Here's some things to know that will help you navigate your organizational bureaucracy, be it government or corporate. Then I've succeeded in serving my audience.
Yeah. So tell us, I love titles, as I think you know. And so I'm curious, I'm reading into it, but I don't want to make any assumptions. Tell us about the title of this book, Scaling Pyramids. And I also think I'd love to hear just a moment about that subtitle, which you kind of talked about, but I'm just like, literally, when you're picking a title, that's a big deal for an author.
Yeah.
Scaling Pyramids. So you just said it's like, it's kind of that process begins with you as this leader, but you also are referencing in this title that there is a pyramid.
So, yeah. So actually, we need to start with the subtitle because for the longest time, the whole title was Leadership Lessons from a Mid-Level Bureaucrat.
Okay.
And part of it was, and I talk about this in the introduction, that, I was sitting in my office one day, filling out forms, trying to do requisitions for things, whatever. And I'm sitting there and it hit me. man, I am such a bureaucrat.
Yeah.
And then I thought to myself, well, but I'm also a manager, because I have people that, below me. I can instruct people, direct them. I'm responsible for their well-being and development, so I'm not a bureaucrat. I'm a mid-level manager. But then I thought, but I work in a bureaucracy,
That's
right?
yeah.
So, oh no, I'm actually a mid-level bureaucrat.
I
And when
love
you
it,
look
Chris.
at it, though,
Yeah.
almost all bureaucracies are built as a pyramid.
Yeah.
And in fact, I've got some drawings in my book at the front of the book
Yeah.
that kind of go
Uh-huh.
through this, right? And
Uh-huh.
it talks about how you've got the CEO or the, secretary or minister of the organization at the top, and then you've got the C-suite, and then you've got the higher level managers, the mid-level managers, and the line workers. And that works the same in either a, corporate or government organization. And it's
Yeah.
really funny because when I was at a conference last fall, I actually asked the audience, I spoke twice, and in both situations, I asked the audience, how many of you work in a bureaucracy? And almost no hands went up, right? So I rephrased it. Okay, how many of you work in an organization where you have policies and procedures you have to follow? A whole lot of hands went up. How many of you work in an organization where you've got forms, either electronic or paper, that you have to fill in required information in order to get things done? Everybody's looking around. They're like, yeah.
Yeah.
How many of you work in an organization where information has to filter up and down through
Yeah.
various levels?
Yeah.
Y'all work in a bureaucracy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and again, that comes back to, the pyramid thing. So as I was thinking of, I'll be honest, what's a catchier title than leadership lessons with from a mid-level bureaucrat? Because it's kind of a mouthful, right? Well, I started to focus in on the pyramid thing, and what is the goal? The
Yeah.
goal is to come from the bottom of the pyramid to as high on the pyramid as you are able in the time that you have allotted.
Yeah. That's
And I thought about climbing pyramids, other things like that, but scaling pyramids really
oh
just
yeah.
struck
It
me.
has double meaning too, right? It's not just
Yeah,
climbing, it could be like creating scale. It's
yeah, 100%.
yeah. Yeah.
Especially as you're looking on the corporate side, you
Yeah.
can't really scale a government pyramid. Scale as in grow and things like that. Although there were a number of programs that I took them from a one or two person program to larger,
Yeah.
five, six.
I love double meaning titles because it's like you turn the prism a little bit and it's like you see other. So my first
Yeah,
book was titled Dying to Lead.
yeah,
So it was both like I want to lead, right? I'm dying to do this, and I also am
right.
going to have to die to myself to do it well. It was like a yeah.
Yeah,
So
great
I
book.
love that. Okay, so that is good stuff, Chris. I hope it's okay that I keep talking a little bit about security as this framework, because we'll get past it in a second. But there's so many
No, it's
things
good.
within that context that people would relate to, whether they're in physical security or cybersecurity and they understand the risk proposition that you talked about. And but everybody relates to this when they're introduced. It's like when you said, "Do you work in a bureaucracy?" and then no one raises their hand. It's like, really? Like they just don't know the word. They don't know what it means, right? And it's like you do
And they
work
don't
in
want
a
to admit that
bureaucracy.
they are actually bureaucrats.
Yeah. And by the way, your description also reminds me, it was a book by a guy named, it's called Seeing Systems by Barry Oshry. And it was
Okay.
a fantastic book on the human side of organizational structures. And he describes the different layers, the bottoms, the middles, and the tops. And he
Hmm.
describes the middles as being torn. And I think so many people relate to that because even if you're a really senior executive, but you're not the CEO, you kind of have this perspective of a middle because you have
Right.
this crazy job. And I have huge sympathy, empathy, all of it for those mid-level bureaucrats because they're having to manage, they're torn between attentiveness and even obedience to a call from the top. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? Like I'm going to be a disciplined on mission person that's going to be aligned. And then they've got people below them, they're the buffer for that. And so it's like when you describe that, so many people relate to that it is and it can feel like a tearing position where you're between these two worlds. But when it comes to the issue of vulnerability, and risk has always been fascinating to me as I've gotten to know you and my other friends in security. And it's fascinating because I think the general public, and maybe it's the sheep,
Mhm.
right, would they often would think of security professionals, or you talk about law enforcement or people in, special ops, or they come out of these backgrounds, or just the military in general, as strong, stoic, and impenetrable.
Mhm.
Impenetrable. How does vulnerability and honesty about limits, blind spots, or even concerns, like how describe to us what vulnerability looks like in the context of leadership insecurity, and maybe even more in general? Like what is so important for people to understand about risk and vulnerability that most people don't think about every day?
So it's actually really interesting, especially in the security realm. And I wrote an article about this that was published last fall, and then this was one of the topics I spoke about at the conference: the paradox of vulnerability in security leadership.
Yeah.
And I know you love paradoxes, right?
Yeah.
You
Yep.
you love to think in
Yep.
paradoxes and examine them, and there really is one here, because from a security standpoint, vulnerabilities are bad,
Yeah.
right? Vulnerabilities are how you get taken advantage of, how you get hit, it's a breach in your security. And your goal as a security professional is to mitigate all of the vulnerabilities that you can find,
Hmm.
right? It also has a tendency to lead, because risk is generally framed, risk being the actual effective uncertainty on your objectives. But in
Hmm.
the security world, that uncertainty and that risk is always viewed as bad. And it's actually taken me, moving out of the security world per se and into the larger risk and leadership world,
Yeah.
um, taken me a bit of deprogramming
Huh.
to come around to some of these concepts, you know, because your risk, that uncertainty, could lead to fantastic opportunities. It could also lead to tremendous downside. And as a risk professional, the goal is really to see what you can do to engage those uncertainties, to figure out how to mitigate the uncertainty so you can chart a more clear path forward, and to mitigate your downside and maximize your upside. When I come back to the paradox of vulnerability and security leadership, one of the things I talked about in the article and the presentation was, out of 560 articles on vulnerability in one of the security trade magazines, I went through their archives and I did a keyword search on vulnerability. Only 6 of them talked about vulnerability as a leadership trait. It is truly ingrained in security professionals that vulnerability is bad, needs to be locked down, etc. But compare that to the outside world: corporate culture, leadership development, where vulnerability is part of emotional intelligence, which is a key theme to leader development. And a lot of it, and what I explain in the paper in the presentation, is that vulnerability is what leads to authenticity. Authenticity is one of the things that supports trust. And
Mhm.
trust is that wobbly table on which high performance teams rest.
Mhm. So yeah. So
You
talk to me.
know,
So talk to me about the wobbly table. So because, and this is a deep trough of thinking for me, and uh but I keep learning and thinking about it as I write and preach about it and all that.
yeah,
Is this It's fascinating to think about, because I say this often, but the definition of the word vulnerability is the openness to being hurt.
yeah,
So we can talk about it as a part of emotional intelligence, like as a necessary thing. But what it means is I'm going to open myself up to being hurt
yeah,
at a personal level. And I was thinking about, when you were talking about, like, when I think about security processes where people want to feel safe, and if they don't feel safe enough, because you talked about the wobbly table, right? They don't feel safe
yep,
enough, they won't go to the coffee shop down the street. So but if it were locked down, it's fascinating to take it to its extreme. So if there were zero vulnerabilities, what happens? Like what does that world look like where there are zero vulnerabilities?
There's no movement, there's no growth.
There's no movement. Did you hear what Chris just said,
Yep.
listeners? There's no movement.
And no growth.
So how in the world, and I just this is what I love, because as a security professional, this thing that applies to everything in life, how in the world do you, what did you just say? Like, how do you said mitigate uncertainty? Because most of us would think, I don't want any uncertainty. So if I get on that plane, I want to know that not one wolf got through that security gate. But if you were with absolute certainty, there would be no plane taking off.
Yep. So let me frame it in a different context for you.
Chris.
And this is something that this is some, looking at risk. The example that I've been giving people recently is thinking about buying a lottery ticket.
Yeah.
Okay. When you buy a lottery ticket, your objective is to win the lottery. There is uncertainty based on whether or not you will win the lottery. So you mitigate your uncertainty on the downside by only buying as many tickets as you can afford to lose the money on.
Yeah.
That also,
hopefully, right?
because you've bought multiple tickets, you've actually then increased your ability to achieve the objective of winning the lottery because you have more tickets.
Yeah.
Right? Now, here's the next problem. Imagine you win the lottery.
Yeah.
What happens then? Suddenly, you've opened yourself to a whole world of new uncertainties because you've won the lottery. And this is something that actually happens to a lot of businesses.
Yeah.
They scale too fast.
Yes.
They focus so much on the upside and not on the downside that they scale so fast they fall over a cliff.
Yeah.
So this, again, moving out of security and more into risk. But this is one of the things that I've been, looking at and talking about recently.
One of the things I wrote about recently related to all this conversation and trust was that I wrote an article called "If You Don't Measure Your Trust, Your Customers Will."
Yeah.
And that we're all doing math that's like going straight at that equation you just mentioned is, it's like this equation we're doing internally about, okay, I know there's always a risk if I drive down the road, but as long as the math is in favor enough, and I don't know what the exact numbers are, right? But then I will get in my car and drive down the road with a bunch of strangers coming at me in the other direction. But as soon as I perceive that math is off, and the benefit doesn't outweigh the potential, and probably for me to drive down the road is a fairly small perception of risk. You know what I mean? And so it's like even the concept of trust is that we treat it so often like a light switch, but it's just not true.
No,
it's not on or off. There's always fractures of trust in every organization. It doesn't matter how great your organization is. Like to live in the real world would mean that there's fractures going on all the time.
And this is why I like to describe it as the wobbly table.
Yeah.
That, and because it sounds funny and it's a great visual.
But and here's what when you say that, it's still a table.
Yeah.
Right? It's not quicksand. It has a structure. It has legs. It's standing, but it's not standing perfectly, right? That is so good, Chris.
And you take out one of the legs and it can collapse in an instant.
Yeah.
Or you can shore it up with extra legs.
Yeah. So when you think you take that to the leadership level of this, and I love what you described, where these are folks who have been raised and are responsible in a context where vulnerability is less good than bad, right? It's like it's not a good thing when you have really severe vulnerabilities, and you invite them to be vulnerable with one another. How would you inspire them to take the step towards something that is a paradox? Because if I tell you something that's vulnerable, it means that you quite literally may, and we both experience this, hurt me with it. So how do you coach a leader to say, like, I get it, but without it, like, what do you say?
And look, I just wrote a whole book about it.
Yes, I know you
I've
did.
got some,
So read the book.
some of the feedback is, they're amazed at how real and practical and raw so much of the content of the book is,
Yeah, that's my
especially coming from, a security leader.
that's
And,
my experience. Yeah.
but one of the things on it is, and this is what I talked about in the article and in the presentation. First of all, admit that there's a paradox,
Yep.
right? You've got to
Right.
acknowledge and admit that there's a paradox, and then you need to embrace it.
Yeah.
And you need to have that vulnerability to build that authenticity so that people will trust you.
Mm,
And you need to, there are going to be times, looking at it from one dimension, there are going to be times when you're going to have to say, I don't know.
yeah.
You're
Yeah.
going to have to admit that. And that in of itself is a vulnerability.
Yeah. That's right.
Um, Especially when you're dealing with a high risk situation. Are we going to be okay? We're going to do everything we can to make sure we're going to be okay.
Yeah. It's
But I don't
fascinating.
know.
It's fascinating because it reminds me of the relationship between vulnerability and transparency.
Yep.
If vulnerability is defined as the openness to being hurt, transparency is the openness to being seen. You know what I mean? And they're, of course, very closely related. So it's like you look through a window that's dirty and you can't see, and then all of a sudden you wipe the window off and you unveil what's actually through that window. And now I'm like, oh, that's what's going on there.
Mm-hmm.
And I love what you just said, that is to accept the paradox and move toward it, as opposed to that part of the answer. So good, Chris, is to accept, and also, and I think, to see the paradox, because that's
Yeah.
humanity. That's our human experience. Okay. I want to oh,
And let me just throw out one other thing real quick.
yeah.
As you've said a couple of times, the definition of vulnerability is the openness to being hurt,
Mm-hmm.
right? From
Yeah.
an emotional intelligence standpoint and from a leadership standpoint, that's exactly right. But from a security standpoint, where the goal is to make sure that nobody gets hurt,
Yeah.
that's a huge paradox.
If you think about what a security professional is responsible for, and we would say any leader, but let's just use this muse, is that if they were to take away all the vulnerabilities, you would not have a very enjoyable experience in life. You would lock up the castle, resources would stop flowing, everybody would feel safe for a while, but you're not going to have that much fun or freedom, right?
And the other parts of it, my background, my profession, I don't want to keep going down the rabbit hole and path here because I know we have other things we want to talk about.
I'm
But
going to read. Yeah, go ahead.
keep in mind that, as I said earlier, we're diplomats and security professionals.
Yeah.
There are times when we have to understand that there are risks and vulnerabilities, but the larger mission requires us to accept those risks, do everything we can to make sure that things will turn out well. But there are some things that are so high stakes that we have to do them anyway.
This is where my heart for security professionals who they can't not think about that.
Yeah.
And it's where I love so many of our dear friends. So let me read you I want to read you something from your book.
Okay.
I'm gonna put my readers on to do this. All right. So it's a
Gotcha.
necessary thing. So you say in chapter 23, and this is on the chapter titled Staying Motivated.
Yeah.
I love reading a little section from an author's book and then going like, oh, tell me what this is going on here. So, and the subtitle is Starting is Easy, Finishing is Another Story. And your entry paragraph says leadership is a process.
Yep.
It is not a quick one-off event. It takes work, and a lot of it, to be a proper leader. I love it that you use the word proper. It's like all of a sudden you became British, which I love. It's like, it's the proper word. I'm going to read that again. It takes work, and a lot of it, to be a proper leader. Education is not enough. You didn't say it's not important. You said it's not enough. It takes experience. Even when you think you have it down, that you have learned all the lessons, there is always room to learn and grow. Also, you never know when a change will come that will cause you to need to rebuild your leadership credentials, standing, and capabilities. Talk to me.
A couple of things. Like I said, it's a process. And I referred to this earlier. You have to have this continuous learning mindset, this growth mindset, because if you become stagnant, you'll become stale.
Yeah.
And you won't be able, to lead either the next generation or even maintain the confidence of the current group that you're leading.
Yeah.
There's another concept built in here, which is VUCA or VUCAD, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The world in which we are operating, it's volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and increasingly digitized. The world in which we are operating is changing very rapidly. On the digitized and the volatility and uncertainty, AI is a great example of that. And I've actually got a dear friend who is moving into the space and really trying to develop a coaching and training practice around hybrid AI human teams
Yeah.
and focusing on the humans, having the leaders focusing on what is the human development that is necessary to effectively guide their teams through this integration.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's you can't just stand still.
Yeah.
You've got to continually be evolving, continually be improving, and it's a process.
And that's actually, it sounds simple, but it's profound. There's depth in what you're describing, because too often we treat it as an event, and not that events don't matter. You and I both would say that events are they matter, moments to pause, to stop, to categorize, to assess. But if it's a process is a living and moving thing. And so when you say
Yeah.
leadership process, it means the development of a person is process focused, but too often we don't enable that part of it. We just, and so I think that's part of what I want
And
one more question, but I want to say this. Go ahead.
okay, but
What are you gonna say?
let me go with one other point there though on the process versus the event, right?
Yeah.
Think about it as scaling a pyramid or scaling a mountain.
Yeah.
You don't just suddenly appear at the top,
We already, yeah.
right? And the book
Good.
there has, I think, 5 pyramids of different sizes on it.
Yeah.
You don't magically appear ready to go at the top of that pyramid.
Yeah.
You've got to walk up the one, walk back down, walk back up the next one, walk back down, and so on. It is a continual process that ebbs and flows. But what a lot of people see, especially in a crisis situation, an emergency situation, some sort of very big public situation, is they see, and and you kind of want it from the movies, right? The hero appears on the scene.
Yeah.
But what you didn't see was all the preparation and all the maneuvering and machinations that it took for the hero to get to that point to enter stage right
Right. It's
and
interesting.
save the day.
You're causing me to think about, like, we hear it all the time, is like, if you're in a high pressure moment, and this is one of the things we assess is take a moment to pause
Yeah.
or you respond. And you mentioned something about that earlier. It's like you waited 10 years, right, to write the book, but it's like, but when you step back, but stepping back is more than just a reflection. It's actually, when you embrace what you just said, that it's a process, it means that as you step back, the thing is still moving.
Yeah.
So, like, not just you are stepping back, but because you've taken a pause, you're actually, if your team's in a moment of some high pressure thing, there's some conflict, as you step back, everyone else is taking a pause also. They may not be doing the same way you are, but it's still moving.
Correct.
So that is so important for people to hear. So I got one more question, but I want to just do a shout out to the book. Is like, grab Chris's book. There's so much good in here developmentally, from a leadership perspective. It's just really good. So, but I want to ask you one last question.
Yeah.
Is that when it comes to trust, in your experience of it, and the process, because trust is, you and I would agree like violently, right? Trust is a process also.
Yes.
Like when it's been broken in organizations where where trust has been eroded, people are functioning within a jungle, and it's difficult. Where do you recommend that leaders and people start? What's the first step in your experience?
The first step, take a hard look in the mirror, right? Because you may not realize or be willing to realize that part of the breakdown in trust is on you. Second step, own it.
Yeah.
I remember a situation, one of my posts, where I made a really, okay, not just once, probably in my life, many times, made a really flippant comment that actually stung someone and hurt them way more than I had intended. And when I realized that, when I took a look in the mirror and I said, wow, I didn't mean to hurt that person like that.
Yeah.
But now I'm hurt because I did that to them.
Yeah.
I need to own it. And I've had times where I've walked in and said, you know what? I said that, but that is not who I want to be. And I sincerely apologize, for that. And I will try to be better.
Yeah.
And, that's where I think if you do that sincerely and honestly, that's where you can then have that vulnerability again, open up that vulnerability to being hurt by that other person that you've just hurt,
Yeah.
and see it through their side, being seen, being vulnerable, and start that rebuilding process.
That is gold. That is gold. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sab, good to see you again.
Good to see you. Chris, thank you for a rich conversation. There is so much to unpack. We want the listeners and those that are watching to know what is the best way to connect with you.
So, a couple of different ways. Number one, probably easiest, LinkedIn. Christopher Stitt, CEM, is my LinkedIn handle. Please feel free to look me up there. My, overall company website, www.crisislead, all one word, .com. That's LEAD. And then I've got a newer website that I'm working on building out that I talk more, where I'm using it more as a vehicle for the book and for my coaching and speaking opportunities, which is, oddly enough, ChristopherStitt.com.
Wonderful. And Chris, one last wild question. Are you in a season of changing yourself or accepting yourself?
Actually, I think it's a little bit of both, right? Okay, I'll embrace the paradox again. I am accepting the change that I am becoming. And it's actually been a lot of fun to really watch it from the inside and from the outside to see how things are going.
Awesome.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today to have this wild conversation with you guys. If those of you out there would like to grab the book, it is available on Amazon. Just search for Scaling Pyramids or Scaling Pyramids book on Amazon. It should be available globally. And I hope that you get it, you read it, you connect with it, and you find ways to continue to scale your own pyramids.
So good. Thank you, Chris.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So great spending time with you.
Thank you for listening to this Wild Conversation podcast. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today.